let me ask you about the Great Depression. You were just a child then. I know your family struggled.
Yeah, but I was an unusual child.
Yeah.
And I was curious, and I saw what was happening. And it was just clobbering my family everywhere I looked. And it wasn't a little clobber, it was a major clobber.
What happened?
Clobber. Well, my mother had 2 sisters, and my father had 2 sisters. And all 4 of those sons-in-law, who were my uncles, got utterly clobbered by the Great Depression. One was an architect, and the mill just stopped building practically everything. And he finally got a job doing drafting work for the county of Los Angeles, and they paid him $108.08 per month for doing that drafting work, which was above what they would have paid an architect, but not much above. And that's what he was earning. And then they passed the FHA rules, and that was competitive civil service examination. And he was a brilliant man, and so he took the examination and came in first. And they made him chief architect for the FHA in Los Angeles, which is a huge program during the 30s to revive at least some building. And he set the standards for that. He wouldn't let the subdivider get by with much. You know, there was a rule of how many electrical outlets there had to be in every bedroom. And he'd make them put in the right number instead of the lesser number. And that was an important job. Builders, under depression incentives, being what they would naturally be, and a good architect being what he would naturally be.
Right.
And so the FHA, which was then fostering a great percentage of the total building that was going on in terms of houses, just said, if you're going to build a house, you got to have so many electrical outlets per bedroom. Well, it was useful work my uncle was doing.
Yeah.
And he was enough of an architect that he could force in a little bit of grace too, as well as the right number of electrical outlets.
But
and one of the things he was very interested in was the plaster screed. And most people don't even know what the plaster screed is, even when they live in a building. But if you got plaster that goes down into the ground, you get capillary attraction that sucks a lot of water up into the plaster. It's not desirable. It doesn't always do that, but it sometimes does it. But it's a tiny little incremental cost to stick a little thing on the bottom of the plaster as it comes to the end near the ground. If you put in that plaster screed, it can't suck that water out of the ground into your plaster. And my uncle made everybody put in a plaster screed.
And saved all these houses as a result.
Yes. And of course, it was a good example for somebody like me to watch that being done.
To put in the hard work early on and the extra
know
step.
what the extra thing that could be added at tiny incremental cost and would last for 100 years.
Wow. You saw your family getting clobbered on all sides on the Depression.
Yes,
How did that?
That was one was an architect.
But how did that?
One was a builder who was broke. He had loans he wasn't even paying off from the 20s. Boom, bubble, when he was a builder. And he made himself an appraiser. And finally, he was Omaha's best appraiser. And he made a good living too. But he had terrible years in the early 30s. And he had a terrible medical problem as one of his children died very slowly of meningitis. And it cost a lot of money. He just couldn't pay it. He had not paid off that fully until the war came.
So what did that?
He finally paid it off and got quite prosperous in the post-war boom. But he had a long period of just being utterly without money.
And all of these impressions
on you. He moved into an extra house that my grandfather Russell owned, and that at least didn't have to pay rent. What
did all these impressions mean for you? I mean, these are formative years for you as you're watching this.
This is quite serious. Yeah. a little boy of his cousin, who's of the same age, is dying next door, and it takes forever and costs a fortune, and there's no money to pay the doctors, the hospitals, anything. That's a serious growing up experience. And I turned to the other side of me, lived Madeline Duffy, my great female playmate. And Madeline and I were just inseparable, living side by side. And Madeline Duffy and I were playing with this little dog that was a stranger to us when we were very young. But I can remember her and the dog, so we must have been nearly 4 years old. Or 4 years old, more or less. And that dog was inches away from my cheek, but it bit her cheek instead of mine.
Oh, gosh.
And they didn't quite get the fast doors treatment in time. They got to it, but it was too late, and she died after terrible trauma. So, and she was a very outstanding little girl who might have grown up to be a Becky Quick if the world had been different. But she never grew up. So I'm sitting there doing two dead children. People don't realize how high the death rate was among children until about the middle of the century that preceded the one in which I was born. And if you wanted, in those days, if you wanted 3 children, you had 6. And you shoveled 3 out of the graveyard before they even grew up. That was the system. That was mankind's system.
That's an awful system.
It was an awful system. The agony of doing that was just, you see the agony with somebody like Lincoln who loved his children so much and did not have a really functioning wife. And for a man who has no functioning wife, to have his children die one by one. So he lost 3 out of his 4 sons. They never grew up. And the one who grew up never had any children.
Did you go about doing that intentionally?
Of course. I could see the power of it.
When did you figure it out?
Well, it came naturally to me. And I was what I would call naturally arrogant. And it wasn't that good a mind. I was in the top 1%, but no prodigy. So I never would have succeeded in a field that required a mind to be that of a prodigy. But it was a much better mind than ordinary people had. And I recognized that quite early, and I just played the hand I was dealt in order to get as much advantage as I could.
When did you recognize that? Were you a child still?
Very young.
Yeah.
When I was taking courses in grade school, I was often revising the textbook and the course in my head to make it more correct because I realized the professor was doing it wrong.
What kind of things would you recognize that they were doing wrong?
They had some crazy idea. For instance, my Latin teacher was a maladjusted woman who was a devout follower of Sigmund Freud. And I recognized that Sigmund Freud was a horse's ass when I still first read him when I was in high school. And, of course, it was an odd little boy whose Latin teacher is teaching him Freud. But she was peculiar, and so was I. And, of course, when I bought the complete writings of Sigmund Freud from the American Library. It was one big book, and I went through it very laboriously, and I realized he was a goddamn lunatic. and so I decided I wasn't going to learn that from my Latin teacher. And that's the way it is. That's what I went through all my life, trying to turn every teacher into my Latin teacher. Just a poor fellow, I hadn't quite learned to understand it right yet. Now, I didn't always succeed. I had some very unusual teachers. The best teacher I had in my life was Lon Fuller, but he was the best contracts teacher in any law school. And contracts is the best subject in every law school. At least, I think it is. because it integrates so beautifully with the new doctrine of economics that came along with Adam Smith and all those people. And of course, I could see the integration, and so could this Lon Fuller, who was a damn contracts teacher. Now, he'd been the leading contracts teacher in some other law school. That's what got him to Harvard by transfer, which was rare in those days. And also, I could see in the Harvard Law School something very interesting. When I went to the Harvard Law School, it was in the immediate aftermath of a long, long range in which 15 professors handled 1,500 graduate students. This is unheard of. Nobody had ever done anything like that. It just morphed into that system, and it did it early. And of course, when you have a system like that, it really helps to have a few big ideas that are strewn through the system that are useful, and some professor that sees it. And that's what Lon Fuller did. He really saw the whole damn. He integrated law and economics is what he did to some extent. And the reason he did is he wanted to know, why do we have these kind of contracts that so obviously make modern civilization work? And he didn't explain exactly why, but I can sort of explain why to myself after hearing Lon Fuller. Well, that's an ideal teacher.
You had this idea of mental models before you
Yes.
got to him, though.
Yes, and I just naturally came to it. But it was very much a Lon Fuller-esque thing. I was just awestruck by Lon Fuller. I have never been awestruck by any other teacher in my whole life, including some gifted mathematicians and physicists who did some remarkable things. But Fuller really he really changed my life. He almost made me a law professor. I considered being a law professor. But then I knew I'd be pretty good at it.
Did you keep in touch with him for a long time after
I
law school?
never kept in touch with him. He was so remote a figure to me. It was like Moses or something going down from the mountaintop. And I was pleased he was there for ordinary. And he'd put it all in a book. I didn't need Lon Fuller. That's the way I handled almost all my teachers. I didn't need them. Well, that's a very interesting question, and it's a very important question. And of course it's harder. It's so much harder you can't believe it. The people that have found it harder are the people that made Warren so rich. Ben Graham and his colleague Dodd in a damned adjunct course at Columbia. And by the way, Graham was invited into 3 different economic departments at Columbia on the full tenure track and turned them down. He was that good at literature and math and so forth. Both, which is rare. And Ben Graham was interesting. Ben Graham was polymathic, like the Davises, a different way. And the same thing, also somewhat musical. And something of a dancer. He liked to dance well. Something left out of me. And at any rate, what Ben Graham did that was so interesting is that he taught that you should find a few good things and stay with them for a very long time. But a long time to him was a few years. It wasn't a few decades. And he did that for like 40 or 50 years in a little investment partnership with incentives and so on. And his investors, who were by and large not very rich, did very well with him. After he got his share, they got a good cut that was higher than what other people got after fees. And So he delivered a valuable product. And he taught you got into things, it could be a lousy business, but if they were cheap enough, they're still all right if they had enough assets per share.
Right.
So you're getting at least twice as many assets as you were paying for.
Yeah.
And he just floated around for the best available stuff among companies, good and bad.
Yeah.
That was his system. And he had worked for 50 years. His clients had good returns. Well, after he became so famous, partly with the help of Warren Buffett and Warren Buffett's success, everybody tried to do the same thing. And of course, as everybody crowded in, trying to be a little Ben Graham, it got more and more competitive. And that's what's happened now. And the low-hanging fruit that Ben Graham had a lot of because of the Great Depression has gone away. And if you just try and float from one undervalued bad business into another and pay all the costs and so forth, it just doesn't work well enough for the people that actually put up the money to be worth bothering with. That's the way it works now. But in Graham's time, it was the best way there was.
Well, your upgrade on that was to just look for good businesses.
I saw immediately that Graham was wrong.
Right, and you look for...
And you had, the real money was in the really great companies,
Right.
which carried you up and up and up and up and up.
Is
And
it...
whoever, but I did not really think that we'd ever have one that would, in the, just so many hundreds of billions in Berkshire. I did not anticipate when Warren and I were starting with our little piddly start that we'd ever get to 100 billion, much less several hundred billion. It was an amazing occurrence.
What happened that you didn't anticipate? What led to that success?
Well, we got a little less crazy than most people, and a little less stupid than most people, and that really helped us. Then in addition, we were given this much longer time to run than most people because something kept us alive into our 90s. And that gave us a long track from our little fiddling start all the way to the 90s. Those are the two things that really happened. And of course, we wised up over time. We got into better and better companies, and we understood more and more of the bad things that could happen to you and how easy they could creep in. And we avoided them even more assiduously when we were old than we did when we were young. And it all worked.
I think back in 2015, for the 50th anniversary of Berkshire, you wrote in the shareholders letter that, among many other things, you had a $60 billion pile of cash at that point. You thought that that pile of cash would decline over time because you'd be able to buy more and more things. Now you've got almost $160 billion in cash. Is there an opportunity for a really big purchase with that? And do you think you'll see one?
Well, of course, there's an opportunity for a purchase a lot bigger that people can make who don't have 160. We have $160 billion in cash, plus a great credit rating we deserve. And who in the hell has that? Not very many. Yes, but what it's going to be, I can't tell you. It can't be anything too small, because it doesn't matter how good it is. We're of a size now where too small just doesn't move the needle very much. So we need something big to come along and use up all our cash and some borrowing. But who's more likely to find something than a guy who has 160 billion in cash, plus a long history of buying bargains? I don't think it's hopeless. It may have to be done by some different people. You know that the next time we may not be able just to squeeze a little more lemon juice out of the old lemons. We may be able to, we may have to squeeze some new lemons, meaning new people may have to make the decisions. But who can make them better than somebody that has watched the early process all through all those years and seen how well it works, and who starts with a little legacy of 160 billion of cash. Well, I think my worst trade was buying a block for the Munger family in Alibaba, which is a pretty good company, but I think it got overhyped. And Jack Ma made mistakes in dealing with the Chinese government. I had some everybody has some bad ones.
Yeah.
You have an off day. The greatest tennis player goes out there someday to the center court and has a bad day. It happens.
I think people learn more from their mistakes sometimes than
And their bad days even.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what really is knowing you can have a very bad day. Do not live your life in such a fashion that a bad day can kill you.
Mm-hmm. Which means what when it comes to investing? Making sure you don't use leverage?
Well, they aim for the fences. It's like a hitter at baseball who tries to hit a home run on every pitch.
Yeah.
The great home hitters do not remotely swing at every pitch. That's halfway good. They wait for one that they can really handle. And that's what great stock pickers do too.
How do you know? Because I know leverage has always been something that you guys have shied away from, using too much leverage in situations. But you're also...
Well, yes, but it wasn't like we didn't use any. Mm-hmm. Insurance float gave us some leverage. That's why we went into it.
Right.
And averaged out over our lifetimes, we've benefited from insurance float.
But I guess the difference between not wanting to over leverage in a situation, but also knowing that if you think something's a real deal, to really load up on it, because you're only going to have so many great pitches, perfect pitches.
Yeah, we're not holding our cash for the boom that's going to come in 1999.
Yeah.
We may end up that way, but it may have a different protagonist, but that may happen, which is fine.
Mm-hmm. I think some of the lessons in life that you give people, though, I guess if it's so much harder to do things now, and you've talked about this, how for this generation it's going to be harder to do things like buy a house, make the same sort of money, be able to get ahead in such ways.
Of course. It's going to be harder to earn the same kind of percentage returns after taxes and inflation as this last generation of endowment managers earned. They've trained all these universities to expect a 6% yield return because that's what they want in order to do what to spend as they want. But it is not given in the stars that a 6% annual return will surely be wonderful for the good investors of an era.
I mean more broadly.
The great bulk of the investor may earn a lot less than 6% instead of a lot more.
I just mean for, the average person who's looking at this thinking it's going to be harder to buy a house. Is the American dream further out of reach for young people today?
Well, for some it is and for some it isn't. There also was never a place where anybody who got a degree in computer science got a salary, a cash bonus, and a block of cheap stock every year for free, just floating in. And sometimes in a very good company. And there are more companies like that are offering benefits like that to people that are just starting out in computer science. So in some sense, it's easier. So for some people, it's easier. There'll always be something in a rich civilization that's a little better than other people get, as well as a little worse. And all these people prospering today in computer science are in the right place, and they're prospering more.
Charlie, let's talk a little bit about bureaucracies, because you have duly noted the problems with bureaucracies, whether it be a big company, whether it be the government.
Have I ever?
Right. So how would you fix some of the bloated bureaucracies out there? Let's start with the federal government.
That comes in my too hard pile. I can't tell you how to do that. That would be really hard, because you got the problem of A, figuring it out, and B, getting it done. And to solve both those problems that is really climbing it's like picking the high peak on Everest and saying, oh, well,
I mean,
well, we all know how to get through them. The great philosophers of realism are also the great philosophers of what I call soldiering through. If you soldier through, you can get through almost anything. And it's your only option. You can't bring back the dead, you can't cure the dying child, you can't do all kinds of things. You have to soldier through, and somehow you soldier through. If you have to walk through the streets crying for a few hours a day, it's part of soldiering through. Go ahead and cry away, but you can't quit. You can cry all right, but you can't quit.
you've had time in your life when you've done that?
Sure. I cried all the time when my first child died, but I knew I couldn't change the fate. In those days, the fatality with childhood leukemia was 100%.
That was your son.
That's gone away now. Now the cure rate is way up in the 90s, and it's an amazing development. Think of how much pleasure it's given me to watch the cure rate for leukemia. What mankind's civilization did was soldier through those tough years that took away my cousin Tommy from meningitis, and took away my son Teddy from leukemia. Imagine pretty well fixing that disease for families who came into life later. It's a huge achievement. You can see why I like civilization. To me, civilization is what man has done with the last 2 centuries, and it's been a good thing to watch.
Charlie, Warren Buffett told me that a long, long time ago. You told him he should live his life, he should write his obituary the way he wants it written, and then live his life accordingly.
Yeah, sure.
I assume you've done the same thing for yourself.
Well, no, I've written my obituary the way I've lived my life, and if people want to pay attention to it, it's all right with me. And if they want to ignore it, that's okay with me too. I'll be dead, but what difference will it make? And so, but I think it's not a bad idea. Listen, Warren and I both live in the same house for decade after decade after decade. All our friends get rich and build bigger and better houses. And naturally, we both considered bigger and better houses. And I had a huge number of children, so it was justifiable even. And I still decided not to live a life where I looked like the Duke of Westchester or something. And I was going to avoid it. I did it on purpose.
Why?
I didn't think it would be good for the children.
That it would spoil them?
Yeah, it's. From a rich family, you think your duty is to use the wealth to live grandly. That's what everybody's doing with the money. You will learn from the people that are doing it.
Is the plan for your life, the obituary you would write in your 30s, the same you would write today?
Sure. I basically believe in the soldier on system. Mm-hmm. Lots of hardship will come, and you gotta handle it well by soldiering through. And a few rare opportunities will come. You gotta learn how to recognize them when they come, and not make too minor a trip to the pie counter when the opportunity is available. And those are simple lessons.